Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 281 of Humanity Rising. Today, we want to contemplate the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects, something that we contemplated about a month ago, and we want to continue our reflections upon in light of the report of the U.S. Defense Department to the U.S. Senate this last Friday. But before we delve into that very complex but dramatic domain, let us take a moment, as we always do, and just pause, center ourselves in our bodies, take a deep breath, and place your attention on your heart for just the next minute or two. Attune yourself to your heart in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to commence our program by a reflection on the UFOs. We're waiting for Daniel Sheehan, who's the general counsel to Luis Elizondo, to come on the program. There's been a delay, so I will frame this conversation while we're waiting for Danny to join us. Danny and I actually met back in 1973 when we were both studying at the Harvard Divinity School. I was doing a master's degree there, and Danny, who had studied at Harvard Law School and then had gone on to practice law, was returning to Harvard to go into the Divinity School, because as a result of his contemplations, he was starting to delve into various metaphysical issues. We became acquainted very dramatically, and became fast friends, and began to work together. And one of the subsequent interactions that we had was we were both working in Washington, D.C. at the Jesuit National Conference in their Office of Social Ministries. Danny as the general counsel for the office, which was headed by a Jesuit named Bill Davis, and I was brought in to become the director of nuclear affairs. And at that time, nuclear power was a real issue around the United States and the world. We managed to get the Jesuit Office of Social Ministries to take a position against the further development of nuclear power. But while we were there, as I think I mentioned the last time we had Danny on about a month ago, with real excitement, Danny and I went to the National Archives. And there we looked very late at night. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and had special permission to go into a certain room. And we looked at microfilms of various photographs that were taken of UFOs. And as you know, those of you who have studied this phenomenon at all, there are three classifications for the UFO phenomenon. One, and most commonly, are sightings, people who've seen strange objects in the sky. And contrary to popular opinion, most people don't immediately identify an object as a UFO. That's not natural. The way the human mind works, the way all of us work, is when we see a phenomenon, we immediately categorize it within categories of the known. And it's only when we can't figure it out through known categories, in this case, it's an airplane or some balloon or some object in the sky, that we puzzle. And that's actually the source of the name, the UFOs. They're unidentified flying objects. So they're objects that don't fit into any known human category, but undeniably exist. And then there are a second category of UFOs that are landings. And this, of course, is a very famous incident in 1947 outside of Roswell, New Mexico, where apparently an unidentified flying object, not of human origin, actually crashed. And it was near a military base, and they went out and investigated and found debris, and actually found bodies of alien creatures. And the Pentagon immediately ordered a cover-up, and the information that had initially gotten out, there were farmers and different people around the area who saw it crash, and went out to the crash site, and it was incontrovertible, as was reported, but the information was suppressed. And then there are UFOs of the third kind. And that is a UFO phenomenon where human beings actually encounter the spaceships or the aliens upon landing, have intelligible conversations with them. In many cases, are taken into the spaceship. In some cases, the spaceship leaves planet Earth, and somehow the human is given oxygen or in some way transmuted so that they can survive in an alien non-oxygen environment, and then they're brought back to Earth and let go, as it were, and they live to tell the tale. So those are the basic categories of the UFO phenomenon. And there's been an accumulated body of evidence from literally all over the world. I remember back in the 80s, the late 1980s, in Moscow, when I was working with various Soviets and Americans and Soviet-American relations in the whole domain of citizen diplomacy. And there was a good friend of ours, a man by the name of Tancred Golan-Polsky, who was a journalist. And he'd been out in the Ural Mountains. And he came back highly agitated and just reporting that not only he, but hundreds of people had witnessed very low flying UFOs that were literally round saucers, and that had gotten so close that he could look up and actually see the detail of the craft, and that it didn't last for a couple of minutes and then kind of disappear, but hovered and circulated, and people took pictures, and there was great commotion, and finally the police arrived, and the military, and then the phenomenon disappeared. But it left Tancred, because I was one of the first people to meet him when he came back to Moscow. He was just altered. The experience of witnessing in an incontrovertible way the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects. Those of you who've had that experience will remember it for the rest of your life. I had an experience actually in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, with a couple of people. We were just walking in the hills, and it appeared on the horizon three little dots, little circles, and they started to move randomly. It appeared, and I thought, that can't be an airplane. No airplane that I know of can go back and forth and up and down abruptly. And we all stopped. There was about 4 or 5 of us, and we all stopped. And I said, "Do you guys see that?" And they looked, and they all saw it. And I said, "I just want to check this out, because that doesn't appear to be normal." And they moved up and down and around, and they looked like they were coming forwards. And then, quick as a flash, they just streaked out of sight. And it left all of us just standing there, with our mouths open, realizing that we had seen something that was unidentified. It was unidentified, and it was flying, and it was clearly an object. And I've never forgotten that instant. I can still remember the surroundings, the time of day, who I was with, and it's just been an extraordinary experience to have. And we might even have people, if Danny doesn't show up here pretty soon, we could just invite people to share their experiences of the UFOs. But let me frame this phenomenon in a broader way, because this is not a new phenomenon. The UFO phenomenon goes back to deep antiquity. And in fact, there are basically 2 creation myths that are common to ancient societies all over the world. One we know the most about, and that's the myth of the flood. There's, I think, between 350 to 400 primitive ancient societies from China, India, the Middle East, Africa, North and South America, there seems to be a collective memory in the species that at some point, thousands of years ago, they estimate maybe 10, 12, 14,000 years ago, that there was a massive flood. And we know the story most commonly from the Bible, in Genesis, that God had created humanity, had created creation, and humanity proceeded to sin so willfully that God decided to send a flood, and he talked to Noah, and Noah built the ark, and he put the animals in pairs, and sometimes with 7 of the animals, and was on the waters after the flood for 40 days and 40 nights. And then he sent out the sparrow, the raven, and it came back, and then he sent out a dove, and then the dove did not come back. And then he realized that the ark was resting, and it turned out that it came to rest on Mount Ararat, in what is now Turkey. And then he disembarked and let all the animals go, and he and his sons and daughters offered an offering to the Lord God, and humanity was saved. What was discovered about a century ago is that story actually came from an ancient Mesopotamian, Sumerian tale that was thousands of years before the Bible was written, codified in what they call the Enuma Elish. And it was a story of a flood. And the story, not of Noah, but of an old man called Utnapishtim and his wife, that had been commanded by the gods to build an ark. And in the case of Utnapishtim, the ark was a cube, and a square cube, and obviously a geometrically perfect object. And there were animals, and he was in the cube for 40 days and 40 nights, and then he disembarked, and humanity was saved. And it's interesting that in Noah's case, the promise to Noah through the rainbow, remember, he made his offering and the rainbow appeared, and the Lord God said, I will never again seek to destroy all of humankind. In the Enuma Elish, Utnapishtim was awarded with immortality. And he and his wife, who's never named, his wife is never given a name in those ancient texts, but they were given the gift of immortality. And if you remember the story of Gilgamesh, it was Gilgamesh at the end of all of his journeys seeking immortality that went to the edge of the world and visited Utnapishtim and his wife. And Gilgamesh desperately wanted immortality. And Utnapishtim said, you want immortality? Then see if you can stay awake for just 7 days and 7 nights. If you can do that, Gilgamesh, you shall be immortal. And Gilgamesh fell fast asleep. And Utnapishtim said to his wife, my dear, he's going to wake up and argue that he didn't go to sleep. So I want you to bake a loaf of bread for every day he stays asleep. And she baked 7 loaves of bread. And then all of a sudden, Gilgamesh woke up with a start. He said, I just drifted a little bit. And Utnapishtim said, Gilgamesh, these are the loaves of bread. And Gilgamesh looked at the first loaf that was baked and it had become moldy. And with deep sorrow, he realized that he would never gain immortality. But as he was leaving, Utnapishtim's wife felt sorry for Gilgamesh, and she said, Utnapishtim, why don't we give him an herb that won't give him immortality, but will keep him perpetually young? And in order to get the herb, he had to dive down into the bottom of the ocean, and he retrieved it. He thanked them and went on his way back to Uruk. And on his way back, he stopped by a pool to refresh himself. He took his clothes off. He had the herb in his pocket, and he went out and he swam in the pool. And while he was swimming in the pool, a serpent came out of the bushes and slithered into his pocket and ate the herb. And that's why the snake always sheds its skin in its perpetual longevity. So I tell these stories just to say that each culture has a different variant around this common theme that humanity has endured a flooding that almost wiped us out. And the flood myth is well known to the present day, because there's this collective memory that something like that happened. The other most common myth known to the species is the myth of the UFOs. In virtually every culture around the world, there's this memory that at some point in the ancient past, we were visited by aliens, and that these aliens came upon primitive humanity and offered us the accoutrements of civilization. The most famous story, again, is the story in Greek mythology of Prometheus. Prometheus was the brother of Zeus. Zeus had created human beings, and he had created them to labor. So they didn't need to be very smart. They didn't need to be very artistic or very creative, because they had a job to do. And Zeus didn't like us very much. But his brother Prometheus looked at the humans and thought, they need help. So you know the famous story of he brought down fire, and it was in giving humanity fire that Prometheus gave humanity what was needed to produce tools and weapons and cities and monuments. And if you think about it abstractly, almost everything we do is a transformation of nature into culture through fire, through heat, through the transmutation of the elements. That's what humans do in creating what it is that we live by. And again, the story of Prometheus is a result of much more ancient stories, going back again to Sumer and Mesopotamia, which was one of the original gatherers of these stories. And there's a story of aliens coming down to the planet, literally on spaceships. If you read the ancient Sumerian texts, and again, you have this a dialectic in the alien community itself about how to treat human beings. And there's the story of Enki and Enkidu. And Enkidu was the equivalent to Zeus. And he didn't like the humans very much, and he treated them harshly. He wanted them just to work the land. Because if you think of primitive humans, we weren't very much better than the upper primates. And, what do we do with our animals? What do we do with our oxen and our horses and so forth? We make them work the land for us. Well, the aliens that came in from outer space saw humans as people that just worked the land. But Enkidu's brother, Enki, said no. These animals have potential. And working with 7 goddesses, they began to provide humanity with everything that they needed to become fully human. And when they became fully human, they revolted. Humans revolted. They didn't want to be slaves. And it's a very interesting part of the story that has currency in modern biology, that what Enki did with the goddesses is they actually came into our DNA and did some recombinant DNA. And if you look at the second chromosome in the human body today, it looks like it was genetically engineered. Every other chromosome is completely naturally evolved and explained, except for chromosome number 2. And it's the chromosome number 2 that actually differentiates human beings from every other species on the planet. And that came about, according to this story, because of the aliens that had come down. And it's very interesting that just like in the Bible, and the council of gods, and the temptation of Job, and God talking to Satan, and what should we do, and Elohim, the term for God, the oldest term for God in the Old Testament is Elohim, and that's God in the plural. And that's really important in terms of these UFO stories, because there was a plurality of gods, and they weren't always in unity. And the very ancient Sumerian myth of Enkidu and Enki, and there was conflict between the gods, and the humanity, was liberated and then revolted. That's all part of the storyline of the aliens, which is important. Just because aliens are coming doesn't mean they're good, doesn't mean they're bad. But what we can know is if they have the capacity to come to planet Earth, they're far more sophisticated and far more powerful than anything we've got. And the stories originally around the UFOs was that they were not benign. There's stories right now. What are we going to do with the moon? And the Chinese have announced that they want to get to the moon to start to mine it. Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all those guys, want to go to Mars. They're not going to Mars with any kind of benign intent. And so it's really important as we think about the UFOs that we realize these are highly intelligent beings capable of incredible sophistication of technology. And they may look down on planet Earth and say, whoa, that looks like a great mining colony. It appears that was the first intent when they came to Earth. And in fact, if you are familiar with the Mahabharata, Mahabharata is it's loosely, it's the equivalent of the Bible in India. And the Mahabharata is actually the largest, longest epic poem ever written. You think of the Iliad or the Odyssey, even the Bible. The Mahabharata is just a much bigger tome. And one of the sections of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, the story of Arjuna and Krishna. And that's very important because Krishna, in the overall Mahabharata, was one of the aliens. And there's a very interesting story contained in the Mahabharata about these aliens that came to Earth. And they had different kinds of spaceships that have been drawn. So we have actual pictures that have come down through time of what these spaceships look like. We have actually figurines of what these spaceships look like. And the story that the conflict between the aliens got so intense that war broke out between them. And they used nuclear devices. And there is, in fact, in Pakistan today, a site, very ancient, going back 10, 12,000 years ago, where there is the residue of a nuclear blast. And if you go to the site, it shows people that have been basically oxidized by a nuclear explosion. They've all rushed to one end of the room as if they're trying to get away. And the glass objects in the room, not only this room, but a whole complex, a little city, have been liquefied, as would happen with a nuclear blast. And it's very interesting if you know the story of Robert Oppenheimer. Robert Oppenheimer was the physicist that basically led the U.S. effort in the Manhattan Project in the Second World War to produce the nuclear bomb. And it was Robert Oppenheimer that led the team, and the first ignition was the Trinity test in New Mexico on July 15th, 1943. And you may remember, if you know your history, they were unsure whether if they ignited that nuclear bomb, whether it was cause a chain reaction and consume all the oxygen in the world. They had no idea what was going to happen when they ignited those atoms. But President Roosevelt decided it was worth it. It was worth the risk. So at just before dawn, on July 15th, in the deserts of New Mexico, they ignited the Trinity test, first atomic test ever, or so we thought. And after the war was over, Robert Oppenheimer was on a television program, and he was asked, and you can still see the interview if you want to look it up. The interviewer asked him, "So, Mr. Oppenheimer, what was it like presiding over the first nuclear test in history?" He said, "It wasn't the first. It was the second." Remember Oppenheimer's words when the test had been ignited and he saw the blast rolling right across the desert. He says, "I am destroyer of suns." He was quoting from the Bhagavad Gita. He was quoting the words of Krishna. He'd read the Mahabharata, and he knew the stories that in antiquity, before the aliens left planet Earth, they had a nuclear exchange, and then they left. They haven't been back. So when we think about this alien phenomenon, it's very important that we hold the complexity of this and sublimate our excitement in meeting UFOs within the collective memory of our species who's encountered these alien phenomena, both for good and for ill in times past. And if we can hold that, then I think we will be better served and more cautious about a major visitation of the world in our time. But there seems to be incontrovertible evidence of not only a visitation, but actual modifications of humans by aliens. And this is not delusional. Just to give people a sense of that, Watson and Crick, of the Watson and Crick fame that basically discovered the human chromosomes. Well, Watson, who knew more about our chromosomes than just about anybody, said that you can't explain it through just simple evolution. He said something else happened. Something interceded at some point in our deep past and rejiggered our genetic coding to enable us to become human beings. The astronomer Robert Hoyle, who's the one, if I remember correctly, that discerned the blue shifts and the red shifts, the accelerating, is the universe accelerating or is it slowing down? And I think it was Hoyle that really determined that it was accelerating. And it was Hoyle that said his belief was that human beings came from other star systems. And we know from science now, originally they thought we are the only planet alongside a star that exists. And that's what makes us unique. And that's why life is here. And that's why humans are here. But the more that they are studying the vastness of our galaxy alone, to say nothing about the trillions of other galaxies that are out there, the more they're finding out that planets around suns are very common. And there are about 50 billion, that's billion with a B, planets more or less like Earth, same size, same distance from the stars, etc., in our galaxy alone. The converse of that is that our galaxy is so big that if we assume that out of that 50 billion, there was 1 million of them distributed across the galaxy that even wanted to come to planet Earth, and that may be the biggest assumption of all, that they actually want to come here, and they all were traveling at the speed of light, 1 million sophisticated civilizations capable of traveling at the speed of light, and they wanted to come to planet Earth. One would only get here once every 100,000 years. That's how big this galaxy is. And it's one of trillions of galaxies. So as we discuss the UFO phenomenon, we also have to hold the vastness of space in our consciousness, enveloped with the question of why would anybody want to come here? Because it's going to turn out that we're probably not as special as we think we are. We're not as special as we think we are. And when they come, they will come incontrovertibly with a power that will press itself upon us in an undeniable way, just like we have done to indigenous peoples. And we will probably in all certainty do to the moon and the Mars and the solar system. We will go out with avarice to conquer. And let us hope and pray that the alien civilization that visits our little planet will have a moral sophistication far in excess of what humanity is capable of showing today. So those would be some comments that I would make just generally to get our discussion going. It looks like Danny Sheehan, for whatever sets of reasons, maybe his internet was not working, but he hasn't been able to show up today. So what I would like to do is open the lines up, if we could do that, Rick. And if you want to make a comment, raise your hand. You'll see right down there in the Zoom, the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can raise your hand. And we can have a conversation. If any of you want to share an experience that you've had with UFOs or a perspective, having studied the matter, what I have done is just simply open up some historical and contextual considerations that we might bear in mind as we contemplate these kinds of issues.
First up is Jack. I can allow to talk.
Yes, Jack, please.
Your mic is open, Jack.
Am I being heard?
Yes.
As a little boy, 15 years old, camped in Giant Rock with George Van Tassel. I was one of the youngest ham operators licensed in America. And in Giant Rock in the desert, George Van Tassel was communicating with aliens through shortwave radio technology, which I observed. And they described what would be discovered years later, that out of the sand came transistors, which was part of the unfolding of our sciences. My experience go on, but what I mostly heard was more focusing on the myths. And I was almost going to disconnect, not thinking that I was really in the right place. But also, I've had so many different experiences, but not so as a myth, but as the experiences, and including a time I spent in Las Vegas with Americans that were abducted by aliens, and there was a doctor present who did surgery on these Americans that were abducted by aliens. And in their bodies, he found a metal that we do not have on the planet Earth. This is something I experienced firsthand in Las Vegas or in Nevada, but my stories go on and on. If we're just going to focus on the myths and the old stories, then there's nothing really new. And there may be no reason to hang on here, because I thought we were coming with new facts verifying. I also camped out of Area 51 and had other experiences, but I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the whole experiences that is available to so many of us, yet it's covered up, unfortunately, by further misunderstandings focusing on the myth. That's a lot of talk from Jack, so I'll just listen now. I'm going back into mute.
Thank you, Jack. That Area 51, everyone, has always been a place of mystery where the U.S. military has a presence, and it's generally known that the various UFOs have either been taken there or studied there. So there's deep, I would say, connections between the U.S. military and the UFO phenomenon necessarily. And that's why the study that was being headed up by Luis Elizondo was so important, and his resignation when the Pentagon higher authorities decided not to come clean about the UFO phenomenon, and then Danny became his general counsel. At some point, I'm not sure what happened with Danny, but we'll have him back in due course for a report, because this is very, very timely. The report was issued last Friday. Many of you probably saw it in the news. The essence of the report was that these UFOs are not American. We don't believe that they're Russian or Chinese. We don't believe they're UFOs, but we don't know what they are. I think that was the essence of the report. It wasn't the kind of clarity that I think the public would have liked. And that's why Mr. Elizondo resigned. And in fact, there's essentially a litigation on the part of Mr. Elizondo, represented by Danny Sheehan, to in fact compel or ask the Inspector General of the Defense Department to conduct an investigation as to why the Pentagon is not being forthcoming about what it knows to be true. So what I've tried to do today, everyone, is just to provide some context and most importantly, the deep context for this phenomenon, that it is not just a modern phenomenon. It's a very ancient one that goes back to the dawn of human awareness and existence on the planet. There's always been this notion of a visitation by the gods, visitation by superior beings that then became gods. And it's common in every continent around the world, so that we can both rest in that awareness that we're not alone, but that this awareness is not new, and that the people that have these encounters are not crazy. And you remember what Danny said last time, and that's how John Mack at Harvard, a psychiatrist at the Harvard Public Health Department, got involved. The Pentagon was saying that if you talked about UFOs, you're crazy. And John Mack was asked to assess them and determine that they were not. And then that began to interest him. and the rest, as they say, is history. But if there's another hand, I understand there's Professor Jonathan with your hand up. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your great context of putting this in context. I mean, myth is very real. What's interesting, the synchronicity is just yesterday, somebody said I needed to talk with you about Chartres. So here we are, but we're not talking about Chartres. But I think in terms of, and I think Danny not being here is good that it opens it up. And I just really admire his work and your work and everything that has been going on here. The big thing I think that has come out of this report is that, you know, they are now saying UAPs are real. And it's actually moved beyond the military. We don't really need these jet fighter identifications. The phenomena is for real now. And now what is it that we do with it as in terms of culture, in terms of the humanity of the earth, in terms of what Thomas Berry is working with or has worked with in The Dream of the Earth. And there's a lot more to that, Teilhard de Chardin. So I think it's your contextualization, I think, is very, very important, that we move it beyond the military industrial complex. We don't need that. This has been going on for, 75, 80 years. I just happened to pass through Roswell last week, and there were crowds out the door wanting to get in to see the Roswell Museum. So the question I had put in there, UFOs are real. Now what? What do we do, and how do we move this whole story forward? And I think what you're doing at Ubiquity is really a major vessel for doing this. So thank you very much, and appreciate and look forward to hearing more as to how Ubiquity will help civilize this conversation, which is cosmological. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. You're asking a very important question. UFOs are here. Now what? Now what? And I think it's the now what that is of the highest interest to us. And I think, there's a couple of consequences or implications of the UFO phenomenon. I think the first and most obvious one, as I've contemplated this and talked with Danny and others, is the fact that it frames human life now incontrovertibly within the context of cosmic life. For almost its entire history, humanity has thought that we're alone and that we're special, and that the world is the earth, the planet is the center of everything, and everything revolves around the planet. And that ethnocentricity, that egocentricity, has been gradually shape-shifted as first we began to realize that, actually we're not the center of the cosmos. We revolve around the sun. And the sun is a minor star in a galaxy of trillions of galaxies, and therefore the insignificance of humanity is almost overwhelming. But still, particularly through our religious narratives, God created the heavens and the earth and created Adam and Eve and et cetera, we have this notion of specialness. Christians, for example, believe that Jesus, the Son of God, came down and died for our sins. Well, what does Jesus mean on Alpha Centauri? What does Buddha mean to people coming from another galaxy? So all of a sudden, the phenomenon of the UFOs not only reframe us within a huge living cosmic system in which we're insignificant, but the phenomenon of the UFO radically transforms our fundamental religious phenomenology and the fundamental stories that we have been telling ourselves for thousands of years about how special we are and that God loves us in a special way. Well, he may, but our stories may be limited to this little planet and have very little utility as we move beyond our planet into the larger solar system, and that brings us to the question of, if we were going to communicate to other life forms, how would we do that? And if you think about it, what we would start with is mathematics. We would start with geometry, because it's highly probable that a square is a square wherever it happens in the universe. A circle is a circle.
And Jim,
The
this,
Pentagon.
excuse me, this is being provided through the crop circle phenomena. If you look at the sacred geometry that is coming in the fields just most recently. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're absolutely right. How do we communicate with our brothers and sisters? And it wouldn't be English, maybe Latin. I don't know. I'm joking, but thank you.
But no, that's a very good point. The crop circles. There's every evidence that the crop circles are either the planet trying to communicate or some other phenomenon trying to communicate, and they communicate through geometric shapes. So that's worth contemplating, that what is universal here is not Muhammad, it's not the Quran, it's not the Bible, it's not the Dhammapada. It's mathematics, it's geometry. And that phenomenon of fixed arithmetic equations and geometric shapes, as Pythagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher, intuited, was what actually enables the one to become the many. It is the building blocks of the cosmos itself. And so if you think about the UFO phenomenon and a spaceship landing, what would you say to them? What would you want to communicate or hear from them? You would, in the first instance, want to kind of communicate that which is common between the two, because out of that commonality may come peace and understanding. So I think this is some of these implications, and we would probably look at all of our squabbles and our cruelties to one another in the planet in a completely new light if an alien spaceship landed on the mall in Washington, D.C., for example. So anyway, those are just some considerations from a guilty bystander about a phenomenon that is mysterious, but is deeply mesmerizing, I think, to all of us. But we have another hand up.
Raquel has her hand up, Jim.
Raquel, what would you say to this phenomenon of the UFOs?
Unmute.
Hello.
Yeah, Raquel, you're live. What's your comment on the UFOs?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Jim, for this contextualization, which is absolutely gorgeous to finally give like this historical consciousness of UFOs as something existing forever. They've been, like the professor was saying, our brothers and sisters that I am very sure that they had something to say precisely in this lost chain or this lost link that unite us to what reality is in this earth. So thank you very much for the contextualization. So the reality is bad. They exist, and now what? And my question would be, and the comment would be, well, two things. One thing is, why in the world, if they want to communicate, if they have the means to communicate, if they are, which I do believe they may be, much more intelligent and technologically advanced, why don't they communicate in a massive way, not just here and there, but in a massive way at the same time to many countries and to many people and authorities and people, all over the world, and at the same time, so that they may be known and heard if they really want to communicate. So that's one thing. And another thing is, do you think that they don't do that because they don't want to, let's say, intervene in our free will as humans? And the last thing will be, what about, because it was also commented in the chat, and I think it's a great idea that I also have, which is, wouldn't these UFOs that we call interdimensional contacts instead of interstellar contacts? So
Those are great questions, Raquel, and it would take a better person than me to answer them comprehensively. But I would say in the first instance, to your first point, I think that's something that all of us have wondered. Why is the UFO phenomenon so indirect, shall we say?
scattered, yeah.
And why don't they just land, in
Massive.
a demonstrable way that is carried live on world news? They walk out of their spaceships and kind of announce themselves in front of God and everybody. I've always wondered that, as the old joke is, why are the people that see the UFOs always the ones that live in the trailer parks? That there's something off about the enormity of the phenomenon and the fact that they, for all practical purposes, have stayed invisible. So one assumes that they are not wanting to meddle, but the memory of the species about the original landings of the UFOs was that they did meddle. They came in like colonizers and wanted to use metals from the earth and wanted to use human beings as laborers. And that story has been told all over the world about human origins, and that in fact, they engaged in genetic manipulation to enable us to be more competent in our capacities. And yet now, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I don't think anybody can give one the answer. One of the things that Danny was mentioning about those that have reported conversations with UFO aliens is that they've warned us against our nuclear weapons, and they've warned us against our ecological devastation. But I think you're asking the right questions. And then to your query about interdimensional phenomena as opposed to kind of intergalactic phenomena with technology hardware. Someone made a comment in the chat that maybe we communicate not through mathematics but through mental telepathy. And I think that's a worthy point. I mean, it may be that there are UFOs at the macro level of the universe, but they're UFOs at the micro level of the universe, because the universe is infinitely macro and infinitely micro.
Yes.
And we may be experiencing a phenomenon of the UFOs, and the reason why they don't land on the mall in a public way is because they're essentially interdimensional. They're happening, as Jung said, Carl Jung, his interpretation of the UFOs, he was ultimately agnostic, as we all need to be. But he says they are phenomenon that are appearing in the human collective consciousness.
Mhm.
Now, that's something to think about, everyone.
Yeah.
UFOs aren't just external to us that are going to land in some way. They're inside us. They're inside our psyches. And because they're interdimensional, says Jung, they can appear externally, but they're never public because they're ultimately invisible. But that doesn't mean they're not real. They're just as real, but they're happening at a different level of our reality, not so much external, but internal. And
Oh,
so
that
that's
could
something to consider as we contemplate this great mystery.
that could be what you are saying, Jim, could be like those natives that didn't see the ships because they had never seen a ship in the sea. So we probably don't, we are not able to see the UFOs if they come precisely from another dimension because we are not able to perceive those dimensions.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, and another phenomenon here, everyone, just since we're just kind of tweaking here, you've heard of the cargo cults. The cargo cults happened in the South Pacific during the Second World War. And, you know, the Allies and the Japanese were flying all these war ships, warplanes over and New Guinea and so forth and so on, and landing here and there and taking off. And after the war, anthropologists discovered that some of the Aboriginal tribes still living in the Stone Age had started to fashion airplanes and were worshiping these airplanes. That was the phenomenon of in Mexico, for example, when the Spanish in 1521 conquered the Aztecs. When Cortez landed on the coast of Mexico, Gulf of Mexico, he was heralded as a god because there was the collective memory in the Aztec tradition that a white man,
Quetzalcoatl,
yeah, was returning.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why the Montezuma didn't fight Cortez, because he thought that this man was the original alien that had come down, returning again. There's even, you know, there's, if you go to Latin America, down into Peru and other places in China, you'll find elongated skulls.
Yes.
That aren't human skulls. It's not a matter of humans, you know,
hydrocephalia. Hydrocephalia.
Yeah, but they're actual skulls that are very elongated skulls, and some of the pictures that we have of these aliens that came down are with elongated skulls. Some of them are like dolphins. So there's a whole amphibian. There's a very interesting speculation that the aliens, when they first came, they had some kind of an amphibian form. That's certainly present in the Sumerian myths. And then you, like the cargo cults, you have several indigenous groups, tribes around the world that actually take their babies and elongate their skulls when they're babies in some ancient memory that this is the way the gods did it in the original creation myth. So you if you look at the the initiatory rites. You'd look at some of the taboos, some of the ways that ancient tribes and cultures would orient themselves. It would be with a memory. This is the way that original God did it. And that's how it gets carried on into the culture, and then shape shifts slowly over time as the culture changes and the memories of the past become more dim.
Yeah.
So that's just another dimension of the UFO phenomenon, the way, like the cargo cults, human societies have sought to honor by replicating what it is that they believed to be true about their origins.
Have you heard about the worldwide evacuation project?
No.
Oh, because it's been a book which has been following me in a very strange way that we don't have time to recall now, but it has been following me since the time I was 12 years old. And I finally read it because I couldn't read it until I was 50 something years of age. And it's a whole book of instructions of what to do if something in the earth happens, and where to go, and what to do to help people to get into the spaceships and be taken away to some other places. So it's very weird. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Raquel. We have one more question. Linda White, I see. Why don't you come on, Linda, and then we'll bring it to a close. Linda?
Actually, Elizabeth was there before Linda. Do you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Elizabeth. Elizabeth, and then Linda. Elizabeth.
Hello. I have concerns that what we're seeing is a UFO religion in the making. And what concerns me about it is that we are seeking solutions outside of ourselves. And if we continue with this externalization of trying to reach out to the UFOs or create meditations and say that we're somehow telepathically connected with them, I think that's dangerous, because we've got very human problems that we need to focus on. And this, to me, is a diversion when we need to be focused on climate change and mobilizing for that. I think it would be great, Jim, if the UFOs could guide us in how we can reorganize ourselves, or how to bring about a just global order. But it looks like that's not happening. And so that's my concern. And finally, I would like to point out that we are becoming an extraterrestrial species. Right now, if you look at what is happening with the Artemis Accords, that's the United States planning on going back to the moon and setting up a moon base. And if you look at it closely, it's not very democratic, and that they are going against international law by doing this. The Outer Space Treaty that says that the resources of the moon are to be used by all humankind. So I'd like you to comment on these.
Well, you're making some very important points, Elizabeth. Thank you. We've got so many problems here that not only the UFO phenomenon, but many other aspects of human life and culture become diversionary tactics away from what we need to be concentrating on. And I think the point that you're making about the moon and the Artemis project and the Chinese intention, and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all these billionaires going out there, they're not going out for the good of humankind. They're not going out to share resources so that everybody benefits. They're going out for profit. They're going out with the same crass mentality. Look at the way Jeff Bezos treats his workers at Amazon. It's virtually slave labor. And they have specific corporate policy to use people up and then just spit them out. That's the mentality that Jeff Bezos will take to space. So that we need to be very careful, in my view, about how we're approaching the UFO phenomenon and use whatever it is that we encounter as a way to upgrade human consciousness and human activity first and foremost on planet Earth, because we won't treat the moon or the solar system any better than we're already treating the Earth. And you can just look around us to see the devastation of the Earth, and the thought of taking that to the moon and taking that to Mars kind of breaks my heart when I really think about it deeply. So really appreciate these comments, because they're very, very important concerns. So thank you. Linda White, and then we need to bring the session to a close. Linda, please.
Hi, Jim. It's really good to see you and everyone. And it's just, this is the essence of my dissertation. I grew up on nuclear Air Force bases and didn't know that not believing in UFOs was a thing. And, it's been silenced. And what I'm really interested in is the recovery that's going to be needed. So I'm really thrilled that it's out in the conversation. But, we have, decades of military officers that have been sworn to secrecy. There's a high rate of psychosis in the contractors that have been, working with this. And all the way down to the next generation. There's a group called the Experiencers Group that has been meeting. And, there's a really strong relationship between experiencers and like chronic fatigue syndrome. And I think a lot of that is because of, not being able to speak honestly about one's experiences and being gaslighted and denied. So I'm just really thrilled. I'm working with Brenda Crowley. She's my academic advisor. And we are looking at this, from a Jungian perspective and, unpacking the consciousness part of it. And so I'm just, in some ways, the report, it's just to get the conversation started. And it's going to be interesting, to see all the different perspectives that people are going to be bringing into this. But again, I grew up looking at the skies and, we called them bogeys. I didn't know that they weren't.
Bogeys.
Yeah, bogeys. That's the Air Force name for it. So, thank you. And I'm always impressed, Jim, your wisdom, how you just jump right in there and carry the conversation. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Linda's one of our stellar doctoral students, everyone, who works as my teacher assistant with Georgie and grades a number of the papers. So Linda's a very strong member of our student body and our doctoral community. So thank you, Linda. And thank you, everyone. Just in closing, I just noticed in the chat a comment on Nazca in Peru, where apparently there was huge landing strips, miles and miles long, that have been cut on the surface of the earth in that place. And there's no conceivable way that little human beings could have done that, particularly with primitive tools, because it's absolutely precise. And the speculation is it was actually one of the landing strips, because you can see it from deep space. Just come in like the airplanes coming into an airport. They just fix on the landing strip. So that's another indicator that we've been visited in the past. So it's been wonderful to talk with you. I apologize that Danny Sheehan did not show up. I don't know why I hope that my comments, as inarticulate as they've been, were at least contributive to getting us to think in more dimensionalized way about this extraordinary phenomenon that seems to be growing in public consciousness and in government internal discussions. And down the road, we'll have more report. We may get Luis Elizondo himself actually to come on to tell the real story of the inner workings of the Pentagon and why at the last moment they've decided to deny the obvious. But that'll be in the future of Humanity Rising. So I just want to thank everybody for your patience today and your willingness to contribute to this conversation that we've had very spontaneously, given the circumstances. And then tomorrow we will honor Stan Groff. It's July 1st tomorrow, and tomorrow Stan Groff turns 90 years old. So we're going to have him and his wife Brigitte live with Stan's brother Paul and Susan Hess-Loger, who's done the extraordinary movie Voyage of the Psychonaut about Stan. So we're going to honor Stan. As you know, every month we've been bringing different people from his life just to honor one of the great spirits of our time, turning 90 tomorrow. So that you don't want to miss that occasion tomorrow on Humanity Rising. So thank you, everyone. We will see you same time, same station here on Humanity Rising tomorrow. Bye for now.